Good afternoon, everyone. On the eve of World Tea Day, it gives me great pleasure. In fact, just thinking about it, that we have at least 4 different varieties of tea and their plantations, which is a part of the rare experience, is something to feel very, very proud about. One of the things about tea that always fascinated me, and from a marketing perspective, is how the Britishers, once they discovered that the tea from India was not doing very well in the Commonwealth market, went about converting an entirely a varied beverage drinking country into a tea drinking country. And apparently, the Var Taj that began at that point in time, which was basically as an energy drink, continues till today. So, on that fascinating note, I welcome all of you on this wonderful session on tea. We have Husna from Glenburn Tea Estate, Darjeeling. We have Surya and Upasna from the Lodge at Va in Kangra, Palampur. We have Venki and Meenu from the Sinadaroy Bungalows. They have tea plantation estates in Kadumane, in Valpare, and in the Nilgiris. And we have Pravirda from the Adabadi Tea Estate, Vail Mahasir, Assam. One of the first tea plantations to be on RARE. We'd like to know a little bit about the Glenburn Tea Estate and its experience.
Thank you, Shobha. Wonderful to be here with such a varied tea sort of connoisseur collection over here. And Darjeeling, of course, is up in the eastern Indian Himalayas, and Glenburn Tea Estate is a 1,600-acre estate that is in Darjeeling, and it's one of the 87 tea estates that is certified as a Darjeeling tea estate by virtue of our geographical index, because Darjeeling tea is really known as the champagne of teas because it's linked to the terroir of the region. So it's only tea that can come from those 87 tea estates that can be called Darjeeling tea. And of course, Glenburn Tea Estate as a boutique hotel started 20 years ago when we experimented with 4 rooms in one of the old Borough bungalows on the estate. And then we added another 4 rooms a few years later. And 20 years on, we are still around, still welcoming guests from around the world.
Thank you so much, Husna. We have Prabirda from Vail Mahasir.
We've been around since 2004, and the tea plantations in Assam, in a manner of speaking, are very intertwined with biodiversity and nature. So apart from just tea, what we are trying to promote is the biodiversity of the region, the cultural diversity of the region, the social impact that we are trying to create, and giving a sense of where history is your host. That's our byline, because Mahasher itself is prehistoric. Tea itself is before Christ. So we've taken on this property, which is in 22 acres in Adabadi Tea Estate, which itself is about 1,800 acres. We've tried to recreate some of the colonial lifestyle, and we try and promote the local population. We try and promote, like the olden days, a lot of hunting, but this hunting is through binoculars and cameras. We do try and do a lot of teaching in the world of ecological and environmental ecosystem services that they provide. So it's a mix of a colonial lifestyle, part of which is the Anglo-Indian or flavors of British Assam cuisine, part of it is the Eastern Himalayan ethnic cuisine, and how do we create social delivery systems with the local communities.
Thank you so much, Prabirda. Over to you, Surya and Upasna from Lodge at Va, Palampur. Kangra tea is not as popular. How has it been to create a plantation experience in this area?
Honestly, it's been a very interesting aspect. I mean, we were always into tea. Our family's always been into tea. We've had this property for a long time, but there were always tourists coming to Himachal and to the Palampur Dharamshala or the Kangra Valley because of the Dalai Lama, and you would always find people taking back souvenirs or tea packets even from us. But there was no stay here, and in that time we were actually constructing an eco-friendly home for the family. And when we had a couple of extra cottages, we decided to open it up, and it fell into place where people started coming and staying, and then inquiring about Kangra tea. And like you said, not many people know about it. It became interesting to actually tell people about Kangra tea, because there is a lot of rich history, and it was regarded as one of the better teas in the world. But because of a devastating earthquake in 1905, the Britishers abandoned the region, and that's why Kangra tea is not as well known as the other planting areas in the country.
Thank you so much. Venki, Veenu, thank you so much for joining in. Taking up from the biodiversity bit, was very intriguing for me to know that all your plantations are probably in one of the hottest biodiversity regions in India, which is almost covering the entire Western Ghats. Nilgiris tea, of course, is great. Can we talk a little bit about the whole idea of plantation in this area? And of course, Sinadurai bungalows.
The way we got into it was quite by chance. We're basically a plantation company. We grow tea in various parts of South India, and we have a plantation in Assam as well. Some of the my colleagues there on the plantations, especially the spouses, were trying to find something to keep themselves occupied. And one of the suggestions was, why don't we get into to invite guests to come and share the kind of lifestyles and experience the tea plantation. And fortunately, in a lot of our locations, we have fairly extensive wilderness areas which the company owns. So that's how it started off, and basically started off as a lark in 2005, but more in a more formal sense. I think much later, I think 2012 or so, as Sinadurai bungalows. And most of the plantations sort of date back to the late 1800s or the early 1900s. Each of the locations are quite unique. For example, Valparai, where we run about, where Veenu runs about 6 rooms, it's on an organic tea plantation. And there is a lot of wilderness, and the Western Ghats are quite rich in wildlife, and if you're a wildlife enthusiast or a birder, this is paradise for you. We also are fortunate to have a very well-entrenched NGO that works there with in the wildlife and restoration area, and we support them through both financially as well as a lot of our land is dedicated to their work. And they sometimes come and talk to and take guests out with them to show them their work. The 2 different processes that we employ in manufacturing of tea, both the CTC and the orthodox, which makes the finer teas. And our organic and orthodox teas are quite well received in both the local and the overseas markets. The other 2 areas, one is Mango Range, which is in the Nilgiris, dating back to the early 1900s, started off as a gold mining area, and this is in the Nilgiris, but not in the high Nilgiris like in Coonoor, which produces, or Ooty, which produces very high quality teas. These are in the lower end of Nilgiris, which where it's much warmer and the yields are very high, but the flavors are not as pronounced. And the third location is in Kadamane, which is in Karnataka. Again, a rather wild space of almost 7,000 acres, and we only farm about 1,000 of it, which is quite amazing for the kind of vistas that you see, because it's at the end of the road and there's nothing beyond.
Yes.
It's a complete wilderness, and it's quite an incredible site. Kadamane as well, we have committed a lot of our land to restoration and research. So we have several of the research institutions based out of Bangalore, and some of the NGOs who have permanent stations there and continue with their work there and have their student space there.
What would be the signature flavor of the Nilgiris tea? And I take it that all the tea that is growing in Kadamane, in Valparai and Nilgiris, they all will come under the Nilgiri tea, right?
No, not at all. Okay. I guess if you look at our portfolio, I would probably rate the what we produce in Valparai, either the organic teas or the orthodox teas from Valparai are of good standing. But then again, the flavors are so dependent on the markets. So in our portfolio, I would rate sort of Valparai as number 1, and the Nilgiri Wayanad, the orthodox tea that we produce there, also has come out very well. As far as experience goes, I think what we try to do is just to try and recreate what it was, and to slow down a bit. And also we're very proud of the work that we do on supporting both research and also physical changes that we are making with the restoration of a lot of the lands that we have.
Over to Husna, we're talking about the heritage, the flavors, and the quality of tea. So Darjeeling as an import is one of the highest out of India.
Darjeeling tea is mainly exported, but now many people within India are drinking Darjeeling tea as well. But what makes Darjeeling tea really interesting is the seasonal nature that it follows. So the same bush will give you a first flush in March, which has a very different flavor. It's very light, it's very aromatic, it's got a sort of greenish tinge in the sort of wet leaf when you have a look at it. And it's got a very specific taste, and that's generally known as the most famous and the most expensive of the Darjeeling teas. So then the same bush, which is picked pretty much once every 5 days from the months of March to November, in late May, early June, gives you a completely different flavor. And this is known as the second flush, and it has more of a muscatel, grapey, sort of brownish, earthy type of wet leaf appearance and liquor and flavor. And it's a lot deeper and stronger than the first flush. And then as the rains hit in July, August, we get a more sort of even production and a deeper cup, which is even stronger than the second flush. And then right at the end of the season, before the bushes sort of almost go to sleep for their winter hibernation, they give us 2 weeks again of an autumn flush, which we call the autumn crescendo. So in addition to these four seasonal teas, we also make white teas, oolong teas, green teas, and the more artisanal teas in smaller quantities. But this is what makes Darjeeling teas very unique in terms of their offering and in terms of the science of growing them, the terroir, which is where they come from, and also the processes in the factories. A Darjeeling tea factory looks a bit like a toy factory compared to the larger ones in Assam and in South India. Of course, in South India, tea grows 12 months of the year. What tea needs to grow is daylight hours. So in the northern hemisphere, the further you go away from the equator, in the winter, the daylight hours drop. So therefore, for Assam, for Kangra, and for Darjeeling, we only grow tea from March to November, whereas in the south, you actually can grow tea 12 months of the year. So as Venki was saying, that these geographical sort of nuances and specialities come out in the flavor, in the way we grow, in the way we process, and eventually the way we drink our tea.
Would you also, within the first flush, second flush, and the autumn crescendo, would you also classify them as the orthodox? So the orthodox and the CTC is in the way you it's manufactured. Yeah.
In Darjeeling, there is no CTC at all. In certain regions where there's a huge amount of crop, now people are resorting to shear plucking and mechanical harvesting. But Darjeeling remains a tiny amount of tea that is produced per acre or per hectare, and that is why it has to sell at a higher price. So Darjeeling is a completely different model because it's very, very small production, and therefore it has to be sold at a higher price to make the whole financial model viable. So that's what makes it very different to Assam. So we have a tea estate in Assam as well, and from the same amount of land we get a huge amount of crop, but we make mainly CTC, but we also make orthodox as well during the second flush period in June. But the overall production is huge compared to what we make in Darjeeling. But then, of course, the prices are very different as well. So you would sell the Assam teas at a lower price, the Darjeeling teas at a much higher price. So it balances out.
In my understanding, it is that 2 leaves and a bud, right? So how do you pluck more from the same land?
The 2 leaves and a bud, and they say that the best tea is actually made in the field, and it's preserved or it's ruined in the factory. So if you pick the perfect 2 leaves and a bud, you'll get the best quality tea. What happens is when people are trying to make up for crop and trying to get more crop in, they tend to pick 3 leaves and a bud or 4 leaves and a bud. And that is what actually interferes with the quality of the tea. Now, some regions don't require that finesse, but in Darjeeling, everything has to be hand-picked, everything has to be even, and that is what will get us our prices. So for us, that is the business model that we have to follow. Whereas in other regions, it may not be as sensitive because you're making a sort of mass-produced type of tea that is what is popular. So, the Assam CTC tea is the best loved tea in India. Everybody loves it. So, even if it sells for 200, 250 rupees a kilo, you can still make a lot more money than you might in Darjeeling, where you're making this very fancy tea and selling it even at a lakh a kilo, but not making so.
And what does CTC stand for?
CTC stands for Crush, Tear, Curl. And there's a very interesting historical story of Shobha, as you were saying in the beginning, how tea only came to be drunk in India in the 1920s and 30s when there was an oversupply of tea. So there was a lot of tea being made across the empire. So they had too much tea, and then it wasn't being drunk enough in England between the two world wars and the Depression. So they had to sort of force it upon the Indians. So they did this very interesting advertising campaign where they showed Indian men serves with tennis rackets and ceramic teapots with the whole tea service, and related it to Swadeshi and the freedom struggle and all sorts of really clever advertising techniques. But what probably happened was that an Indian housewife took this orthodox tea, threw it into a pestle and mortar and said, I can't deal with all this ceremony, added some spices, added some milk, added some sugar, and that was the first cup of masala chai. So then the English actually had to invent a machine that would cut, tear, and curl the leaf so that it would have a greater surface area and therefore give a stronger brew that could take the masalas and take the tea and the milk and the sugar. So that's how the masala tea was born. And that's how the CTC machine was invented. But it's basically increasing the surface area to give you that very sort of granular looking tea that gives you a stronger, maltier, punchier.
For tea, it is the color and the flavor, right? These are the two parameters that you measure a tea. I mean, that's how you...
Color, the flavor, the infusion.
Okay.
Fundamentally, it's that. But unlike Husna's experience in Darjeeling, which is very quality driven, Assam also to a very large extent is quantity driven. So it's a mix of CTC and Orthodox in the gardens. But, since we are into serious chai ki baat, there are some interesting things that are happening in Assam as far as tea is concerned, which is a concept called elephant-friendly tree, for example, where humanity and animal are living harmoniously in tea estates without interfering with anybody, which is called actually elephant-friendly teas. There is a Singpho tribe who are the originals of bringing tea in from Thailand, who still continue to make their tea, which is handmade, which is non-mechanical, which is sun-dried. Today, the whole experience of green tea because of its health and wellness, there's a story there as well, that the whole concept of green tea being healthier was something that China promoted. Whereas the black teas have always been promoted as providing for energy and tandurust. And there is a school of thought that says in terms of health benefits and wellness benefits, there is very little difference between the two. But yes, the tea story is differently entwined with the biodiversity and the community story. How the workforce was brought in, for example, in the 1830s when Robert Bruce apparently stole plants or seeds or something from China and realized that this soil was fertile enough for this kind of growth. They came in from various parts of Lower Bengal and Central India, who today contribute for about close to 25% of the state's population. And within them, they've got about 25 different subcategories in terms of sex, So there's an amalgamation of even tea plantation workers. There are the Adivasi tribe, there are the Nepalis, a lot of them who settled post-Second World War because they were given land to settle down from the British Gurkhas. There are the Bodo pluckers, and the new phenomena of the small tea growers, which is today apparently close to 50% of the tea production of Assam. So it's just not tea, it's actually an amalgamation of cultures, communities, learnings, and interdependence between each other, because the small tea growers are actually growing their tea and supplying to larger factories. So that in itself is creating another value chain of agri-products, if I can call them that. Apart from just the mystique and the challenges of plucking and pruning and maintaining and looking after the social delivery side of it in the gardens, tea managers running townships, thousands of people with schools and creches and primary health care. It's also a thriving economy of social delivery. So, tea goes much beyond than just being the second largest consumed beverage in the world. What is happening today, because the small tea growers are growing in numbers, this whole concept of agroforestry is also growing, which is actually enhancing biodiversity. Because they are doing tea in one plot, they are doing tuber crops of ginger and turmeric in the other, they are doing tamul and fruit trees in the other.
There's beekeeping, I heard last time.
Beekeeping, poultry, piggery. This is actually what I call, our proprietary term is actually coming to life, which is naturenomics. Which is the interdependence between nature and economics without destruction of the environment.
Surya and Upasana. So the VA tea estate has a very, very interesting history. So could we begin with the flavor, the color when compared to Darjeeling and Assam?
So in Kangra as well, we only make orthodox. We're actually one of the only areas, probably in the world, which still has 100% China bushes.
Okay.
So these were the original bushes which were stolen by the British, brought into India, and they found the Kangra region suitable for plantation. So they planted tea around the 1850s, and our estate was planted in 1857. It lost its popularities because of the earthquake in 1905, which is when the Britishers abandoned the region, and that's why the Kangra tea is not as famous as the other places, because they were the ones controlling the trade. They were the ones with the know-how to make teas. But after the Indian families and our family took it over as well, we've been making only orthodox teas. I'd like to say it's similar in production techniques as Darjeeling, but as we were talking about the terroir, it's got its own flavor, it's got its own characteristics. We probably have the shortest manufacturing interval in times of months. We only manufacture early April to all the way till the end of October. So we've got about a 7.5 month cycle because we get colder. A lot of the teas made here are still done in the old Chinese method, which is in woks. There are a lot of families still making handmade green teas, which is very similar to what the Chinese still make. What history we figured out is a lot of this technique was bought in by the British. So there was a gentleman called Robert Fortune who actually went into China and smuggled these bushes into India. And these were the bushes which were then bought in, planted in Darjeeling, and planted in Himachal and other parts of the country, according to the soil, and even in Dehradun, which is where our family started our history from. As flavor and color, as you were saying, the first flush is again our premium teas as well. It's lighter in lighter in color, but more flavorful, more greenish looking. As soon as summer comes around, it starts getting slightly darker or redder. Then we get the monsoon flush, which is very standard tea, more red, a little more bitter. And then we get the autumn flush towards the end, which is again lighter, more flavorful. And then the bushes after October go into hibernation till we start again in March.
Would you talk about why the area is called Va and why the estate is called it? Yeah.
The story is pretty interesting. So the family which ran the estate before partition of India in 1947, gentleman's name was Muhammad Hayat Khan, who was the Nawab of Va. Va is the place which is now in Pakistan. At that time when the country was together, it was all a part of Punjab. And Mr. Khan had good relations with the British government. So he was given this estate to run. And he and his son, Sikandar Hayat Khan, ran this estate till 1947. And they named the estate after their hometown, which was Va Tea Estate. And sadly, during the partition movement, there was riots and they wanted to go back to their motherland. So they abandoned the tea estate and they went back to Va. The estate was then taken over by the government, and our family bought this estate in 1953, and we just retained the name Va Tea Estate.
Venki, is it correct to assume that every tea from various regions, they also have a good domestic audience, and then of course there's the export, and like you mentioned earlier, the tea that is grown in the Nilgiris, in Valparai and in Kadamane is largely for the Indian market, because you said there's a lot more CTC?
Well, it's not just for the Indian market. I think it's more specifically, a bulk of it goes into Kerala and parts of Karnataka. The green teas, of course, sell elsewhere. Of course, we do produce some tea in Northeast as well, and both green tea as well as black tea. A lot of the green tea goes into Punjab, and black teas, most of it goes to Western India.
So the color and flavor of the teas that grow in your plantations?
Okay, the orthodox teas are a very fine flavor, yes. So
fine flavor, and the golden color, is that the sparkling golden color? Is that the benchmark for a good tea?
In the orthodox teas, yes, but I think most of the CTCs are very much more full-bodied and bright, but not as light as the northeastern.
Yes. So I was recently on a session where they were talking about vineyards, and I was so reminded of Husna, what you would say, and I know your inspirations have been from the because of your travels in Europe in the vineyards. So it's almost similar, right? The experience, and I know when they do the vineyard experiences, there's tasting. So how does this translate as experiences for people at your properties?
Yeah, so the tea tour experience is a huge part of the guest experience, and Glenburn Estate is 1,600 acres, of which 1,000 acres is private forest, and only 600 acres is tea. But the factory is very close to the bungalows, and one of the main experiences that we offer is a walk through the tea factory, where you can understand the whole process of how the Darjeeling tea is grown and processed. So the growing is in the fields and the processing is in the factory, and then we have a tea tasting session. And this tea experience can last from half an hour if somebody's not very interested, or 5 or 6 hours if somebody is very interested, and a whole week, if somebody is really interested. So, they'll keep coming back to the factory. The different seasons have different sort of timings. The first flush tends to be very early in the morning, and then it's over by sort of 9-10 o'clock. In the monsoon, we have the process running through the day. So there are a lot of nuances that are very interesting, as I said, when you're looking at Darjeeling tea. But every guest gets to experience this. The tea that is served in the bungalow is generally factory fresh from that growing season, so they get to experience what is being grown at the time. But they can also request to drink other teas. So it's the growing and also the winter practices to do with pruning and the different winter activities that create the healthier tea bush for the growing season is something that we offer even during the popular winter months where maybe the factory isn't running. So even if you come in the winter when there's no growing happening, we will still recreate the process in the tea factory. We will still do a tea tasting session, and we will still talk about all the winter activities. And we have a small audiovisual that we put together that also shows people how the tea is picked. So we can recreate this experience either live in the factory or through these different tools when the tea picking season is not on. So it's a very immersive experience.
Yeah, but the plucking goes on, right? Even if the factory is closed, no, the plucking also stops.
It stops when the tulips aren't being thrown up on the top of the.
So from November up to March.
November is when the tea is picked, and December, January, February. In the end of February, we harvest a tea called the moonshine, which is sort of the precursor of the first flush. As soon as we see the tea shoots, and it often depends on how good the winter's been. If we have a bit of winter rain, then suddenly we'll have an early first flush. So even from the 15th of February, we can have the odd shoots, and we have specific clonal bushes. By clonal, we don't mean genetic clonal, but vegetative clones that are famous for a particular type of quality. And in Darjeeling, we have the AB2 clone. So those bushes are the most aromatic of all the teas we make in the year, and we use those for the moonshine teas. So we will go and hunt for these specific bushes that are sort of throwing up their two leaves in a bud in early February, and then that becomes our first special harvests. And often a special harvest can just be 5 kilos of tea, so it would be packed in a special wooden box, and it might be pre-booked. Yeah, it's a very interesting process that our guests follow through and through when they're with us.
Absolutely, yeah. And at Adabari, Prabirda, the tea experience I know is intrinsically linked with the forest walk and everything. How would you talk about the tea experience at Wild Mahasaya?
Well, one is it is located in the middle of a tea garden. So you're living in a tea garden. Your caregivers are people from tea garden families.
Yes.
You're driving through tea gardens no matter where you go. And during the manufacture months, like Husna was saying, we take them through the entire value chain of tea. From plucking to manufacture to tasting. In the winter months when there is no action happening at the garden level itself, we have our in-house tea tasters. So at least we can explain the mystique of tea a little bit. What is infusion? What is this? What is flavor? What is strength? Etc. etc. That per se is the tea experience. What we are also promoting now is treks and slow cycling expeditions through the tea gardens, by riversides, and stopping at the various different kind of villages that are on the way. So you're walking or cycling through tea bushes, you're watching people do fishing. Depending on the season, you're watching people do harvesting. you're watching people do husking, and then you get into the whole concept of storytelling that goes beyond tea. For example, we've got somebody called Loren Das. He was a gentleman who actually escorted His Holiness the Dalai Lama from Tawang State School. We've got Sushila Baido, who's a Garo. She's like an encyclopedia of the Garo culture. Then we've got Commission Milli. His village, we supported him a bit. Is the first certified green village in Assam. So his story of the Mishings, for example. So you drive through tea gardens, you go into medicinal plots, you go into traditional agricultural practices, you go in and see their looms, handicrafts. You go in and see the way they do their natural dyes, which is intriguing.
Now, on that point, I just wanted to remind Husna, there is also tea that is in cooking, and your spa has a tea menu, so I mean, that's how tea kind of is actually reflected in every activity.
I work with a very talented lady called Bronwyn Latif in Delhi. And when we were searching for our first sort of literally bathroom fittings in a shop up the MG Road in Gurgaon, we suddenly came across this little bottle that was called Darjeeling Green Tea by Forest Essentials. And Forest Essentials was starting off on their journey as well. They hadn't become as big as they were, but they had this special Darjeeling Green Tea range of toiletries. So we've been using that right from day one, and we've rebranded it as our own Glenburn Therapy range of toiletries, and they now only make it for us. So we're very privileged to have that service from them, and it's wonderful. And I still swear by it. All our guests love it. And the tea pakoras came from our Assam tea garden, actually. It was something that we used to make there. The green leaves would come in from the field and they'd be made into pakoras. So we've refined it a little bit by using a slightly lighter batter. So it's got a little bit of tempura flour in the batter. And then when we don't have the tea leaves, then we have nasturtium flour pakoras, which also come from the garden. And then we have a tea themed menu where we use green tea in the desserts and oolong in the infused rice, and we smoke the chicken, and so we have a tea smoked chicken.
Upasana was saying that they also manufacture the tea seed oil.
So I think the tea seed oil actually interestingly started with Surya's grandmother. She's the one who used to get it taken out at the factory here, and we would send it home to Calcutta where she would stay, and she would use it a lot on her joints. She said that it helped a lot with releasing some of the aches from her joints. And I think overall the family was kind of non-believers for a long time. We were just like, it's something that she just wants to do for herself. But over time, we realized that it really is effective. We started researching more, and we realized it has a lot of good properties even for cooking. So we actually use tea seed oil for a lot of our cooking purposes because it has a high smoking point. So we can actually use it for cooking, frying, etc. And it's got a very good light smell and taste, so it doesn't affect the flavor of the food. So we can use it quite extensively. We know that the Japanese use it a lot for their cooking, for their cosmetics, medicinal use, but we haven't yet reached that point of research. That's something we're still working on, but we've had a lot of interest in the tea seed oil. And I think Surya has something more to add.
Yeah, it was something which we learned actually from the Japanese. They've been extensively using it. There are a lot of beauty companies in Japan, in Korea, where they're using this.
This tea seed oil is different from tea tree oil, right?
Yes. So this is known as the camellia oil.
Okay.
That's known as the tea tree oil. The Chinese, Japanese, and the Koreans have been using it in their beauty products, and that's how we were actually informed about it. And that was the first time we extracted it for a Japanese client. And that's when my family started using it, and then when we did a lot of research on it, it seems to have a lot of good properties. So we do extract some every year. We've had some guests who know about it or who've heard about it, and they've become our regular clients buying these bottles of oil from us.
What are the other experiences that you work around the tea?
I think the primary experience with us is, as we're a homestay, between Upasana and me, or my father and mother, somebody from the family is always here to host the guests. And the tea tour and the tea experience and the tasting is either done with my dad, who's been in this industry for about 40 years now, or with me. And we take the guests around to the factory, as well as we do the tasting with them and talk about the whole process from plucking to the tea making, the tasting, how we sell, how the brands trade. A lot of it goes into like what are the problems of running an estate and the economy. And actually, the thing which we're working on is trying to set up a mini factory where the guests can come and actually make their own tea if they spend about 5-6 hours at the factory with us. So hopefully by next year, we should have a setup where the guests can come and pluck their leaves and take the tea back which they've made.
Brilliant. And also both in Wild Mahasir and at Lodge Edva, you can actually do yoga on a tea. Yeah, in fact, Wild Mahasir calls it the Yoga Asamika, and you can actually, they created a pavilion, and Lodge Edva has created a pavilion in the middle of the tea gardens where you can actually have a...
I think it's there's a lot of similarity between what Prabirda and Husna Bhabi have been talking about. Prabirda mentioned that you're living on the tea garden, so it's kind of intrinsic to the fact that like tea is all around you. You can't help but go through the tea gardens, go through it in every activity and every part of your day. And Husna Bhabi is also talking about how they incorporate tea in so many different aspects, and we find that it's the same here. Like she mentioned that people sometimes do a tea, like the tea talk can last half an hour, but it can also last a week, and we feel like it's the same thing. The interesting thing that we've noticed is we've had a lot of people who come in who might not forget being tea drinkers, they'd be coffee drinkers. And over time, with their stay here, they've become so interested in tea that they say, okay, now we feel like we're going to start drinking more and more tea, because what goes into making a single cup of tea. And I think that's the biggest compliment for us, is when we can take this experience and turn it around in a way where someone who's come in with a certain mindset can actually change it and look around and say, hey, this is something that's actually really interesting and I'd like to experience more of it.
And all of you, in fact, have like a high tea and a tea time and endless cups of tea. And I've seen this everywhere, that you can keep having as much tea as you want, right?
A lot of people are surprised at the tea they drink at the garden because it doesn't taste like anything that comes out of a packet.
Yes.
Your packet tea is all blended. So when they get fresh teas, they sort of wake up to it.
And even the experience at Valparai, one of the things that I found fascinating is that you walk in and out of forests when you're walking through the plantations.
We had a very unique situation in Kadambini, especially because the forests and the tea fields are sort of intertwined. They're like the islands in between. So you're never very far from a patch of forest or a patch of tea.
Even in Valparai, for me to be walking through the tea gardens with Murugan and to see, like a herd of gaur there, and he says, just keep walking. That was actually quite fascinating.
Earlier, when we hired managers or assistants to work on the plantations in the south, we would teach them Tamil. So they have to know the local lingo, and they sort of learn how to read and write as well. For example, my colleague in Assam, Bhupinder Singh, is fluent in Tamil to this day, but having learned it as a new assistant. Now we find that when we hire assistants, we got to teach to work in the south, we got to teach them Hindi. The whole sort of the community itself is changing.
It's almost like a little township where there are schools and there's a hospital and things like that.
And also that's a consequence of the local legislation as well. You're required to provide these facilities.
Husna, about the community aspect of tourism, which is very important and which has now become such a major part of whatever you've been doing as experiences and as creating value for the local communities.
I think the community is really the heart and soul of everything that we do at Glenburn, and we wouldn't be anywhere without them. When we started Glenburn, it was very much an experiment. We never really expected us to be where we are today after 20 years. So it was a very organic process. So we started with literally the staff that worked in the bungalow that we were renovating and restoring rather. And we suddenly realized how talented they were, from the cooks to the housekeepers to the gardeners. There's a great sort of sense of pride in their Nepali heritage. And as Prabirda was saying, that when the British planted out these plantations, there was no local community other than the tribal communities in Assam. So it was just forests and jungles, and there was nobody that lived there. So in Darjeeling, they had to bring people across from Nepal into the region where they wanted to grow the tea. So today, the people that live and work on these 87 tea estates are actually from 4 generations of Nepali families that were brought across the border from Nepal to first grow the tea and then to pick the tea. So even though we're located in West Bengal, even though the entire region was developed by the British, you have the Lepcha, Bhutia and Tibetan influences from Sikkim and the region, the core of the ethnicity of the people of Darjeeling is Nepali. So they celebrate festivals, they speak the language, and they are Nepali in many ways. And that is part of the heritage that we celebrate at Glenburn. So it's the tea heritage, it's the colonial heritage, and it's also the Nepali heritage in terms of their dress, in terms of their food, their language, their festivals, and everything. So that community aspect forms a big part of it.
Who also work with you, right?
Yeah, they work with us. They work on the tea and they work in the hotel. So we have 55 staff from the local villages that run all aspects of the hotel, from the drivers to the chowkidars to the Mali, and many of them multitask as English-speaking guides. Yes. And we also have an education program now where we're educating 64 children from the community to local primary schools and secondary schools that are slightly further away from the estate, and we're supporting the local government schools on the property as well. So there's this huge connect that we have. We have an annual festival every year where we celebrate the dance traditions and things like that. So
and the village walk also has now become a part of you.
So we've always walked through the different villages within the estate. We have 8 villages within Glenburn. But recently, when we've had all this sort of time during the lockdown and this pandemic period, we've actually explored some of the local communities that are bordering Glenburn. And we've just come into a wonderful agreement with a Lepcha family that live in a Lepcha village, which is a couple of hours walk away from Glenburn. And we've created a hike that takes you through a beautiful forested and community area near Glenburn, takes you into the village where we're going to be creating 2 Lepcha houses there that look out onto Mount Kanchenjunga, the 3rd highest mountain in the world. You can see that from the hotel bungalows, but also from this village. And we're going to be creating a village experience celebrating the Lepcha heritage over there. And then taking them on a hike past waterfalls, bamboo forests, more sort of little agricultural communities, down to the river, across the river into the forest in the Badam Tamti estate, and then up to a point where we actually found an old shrine where there was a sort of a battle that took place from the hills of this side of the Rangit River across to the Sikkim hills, and there was a shrine made out of stones. And then you come back down into the Glenburn forest. You can spend the night at our river camp there, and then hike up to the bungalow to end with a bit of luxury. So we've got this beautiful rustic and sort of luxury in the experiences through the community and through the hikes and the forests and the waterfalls.
Prabir, the forest bathing, which one of the first instances in the community that we started talking about, and now it kind of it's just like it's so natural that because all of us, all the community of hotel, they have so much of land and forest and gardens around them. Like a nature walk or a forest walk is a very natural activity to have. So and one of my favorite moments is, of course, to walk through the forest that you have created.
Through Balipara Foundation and our botanist teams, we've actually created what we call the Eastern Himalayan Botanic Arc in the 22-acre property. And today we have about 300 species of not only endemic but also very endangered trees and plants. And we have 2 trained homegrown naturalists who are phenomenal, who will take you through this walk and not only tell you about the services that the trees and plants provide and their medicinal or food value or whatever value, but they are also trained bird watchers and butterfly watchers, So through this and the whole concept which we call jungle bathing, this whole concept of tree hugging, which we actually learned from a Japanese lady, is whole part of this botanic trail walk, And then if you're lucky on a monsoon or a hot summer day when it rains and then the sun comes out and all the birds come out, all the butterflies come out. Our last count is the 92 varieties of birds and 72 varieties of butterflies in that region. Apart from the floral beauty that you have, we've got our own orchidarium, we've got a seed museum. There's one little greenhouse where during the Bihu festival they have over 100 ferns and herbs which they cook. They're growing all of them there, so it's ready to pluck, ready to eat. We've got a little mushroom unit there. So that is all the in-house stuff. And this is all run, managed, and supported by the local communities. See, we've had the privilege of being located in a place which has got 8 ethnic communities around us. 5 of them we've opened homestays, where you can actually go and stay.
Go and stay in their village house. Yes.
Yeah, but if you don't want to stay, you can spend the day, and you go through their practices, their medicinal plants, and their folklore. Just be with them, immerse yourself, and come back to the lap of luxury.
Also listen to a lot of the traditions that they know. I mean, the whole concept of Donny Polo, which they would, Mr. Das would happily talk about when you go into his community. So those are actually great learning points, and especially where children are concerned. Now we were talking about this, that the Indian traveler travels as a family, and little kids, also young adults, are a big part of the travel itinerary, right, of the travel program. So these kind of things actually really are very exciting for them, because they study back in school. And as community goes, Surya and Upasana, I know that there are schools that you've been talking about when I went there about 2-3 years ago. So there is a lot of community engagement where Lodge Advice is concerned also. So do actually people participate in the community activity?
So we're actually, if you compare it to any of the other locations, we're definitely more urban. It's a different setup, but as far as community goes, a lot of the estate workers are the ones who are working at the lodge as well. They're not trained hospitality people. It's something which they've learned over time, with all the vegetables, and we grow a lot of stuff on the property as well, starting from wheat to mushrooms to all your herbs, vegetables. We've also started a program where we've told a lot of the people staying on the property who work for us at the estate that they grow vegetables for themselves. So whatever extra they have, they can sell it to the lodge as an additional income.
And what's great is that's completely organic. So it works very well for us.
Even with the Rita, as you were talking about, so a lot of the shade trees which we have, surprisingly here when we took over the estate in the 50s, were soap nut. So you can actually get the soap nuts out and make your own organic natural soap or shampoo. A lot of our labor uses that for their personal use. Same thing with education. There are a lot of scholarships which we help the kids of the labor to get, even with their weddings or a lot of that. We're trying to educate them as much as possible. But I think the main thing is just the involvement. We started involving them with a lot of the labor we get. Surprisingly, play hockey here. So we created a hockey field at the estate, and we have a yearly hockey match. And then we started doing a sports day for the children, as well as some fun activities, so they can all feel a part of it. And we've had some guests who actually participate in that as well. So it's a really fun, immersive experience where everybody gets to see the tea garden life. Because I think with all our plantations, there is a very unique tea garden life which exists, which does hail from the British times, but it's very different from what you're used to seeing today.
I think the great thing, Shobha, is also when we talk about community, let's not leave out the fact that we're all part of the rare community, and we actually get a lot of learning and inspiration from everyone else around us. So the fact that, for example, with Shobha, with Husna Bhavi, like what they're doing at Glenburn, that's something that we would love to actually put into effect here. And we've started working a little bit towards more on the education front, working more with the estate children. End of the day, we're still much younger. We started the lodge only in 2017.
Yes.
And while the state has been around, we hadn't put in that much time and effort.
Venki, so the community, and I spent a lot of time with the team there, and I was just completely in love with Chitra, Uma, Murugan, and I've walked the forest with them. The whole thing about the community or people who've been working with you for a very long time is their feeling of oneness. I mean, is their that the feeling of belonging, and if they realize that you want to see something, they want to take you out that extra mile, take you to that little shrine on the river and things like that. Do you all have a very robust format where community activity is concerned?
Just that these communities, like some of the others spoke, the generations of them have been on the property, and except in Bhalpara, there are very few outside communities that live in the area. So it's pretty much, they live on the property, they live on in all the facilities like schools, hospitals, etc. provided for them.
Yes.
And of course, they're immensely proud of where they are and what they have, because that you can see when you talk to them. And the other testimony is when you read the
feedback,
visitors books.
Visitors feedback, yeah.
Almost I guess about 95% of them would mention each person's name, and which is really goes to show the kind of impact it has made on the guests, as well as, and it's genuine, because
Yes.
all these people have been like the others said, working in the tea plantations, and they have come into the guest facility at some point, and then people like Meenu and Radhika have spent a lot of time with them to get them to appreciate and what is to be done, or what the guests expect. So that in that sense, it's been surprisingly positive experience.
Yes, right.
Now the challenge now is the next generation. The next generation
Yes.
don't live on the plantation. All of them had just much better education.
Yes, I heard them. When I was walking with them, they would tell me about their children working here and there. So yeah, that's quite
And which is also very satisfying, because a lot of them have professional qualifications of very good jobs. But then what will we do in the plantations? I don't know. Maybe we'll grow forests.
Yeah.
But we also have the advantage of some of the NGOs that we support who have been in that area for a long time, and they again on our invitation come and spend time with guests, either over a meal or talking to them about the local area, or take them around on a walk.
You can walk for hours on the estate.
The entire landscape is just forested and with tea plantation. In some areas like Kadavane, there are absolutely no outside habitation at all.
Yes.
So only the entire population is just estate, people associated with the estates. And that again is changing, so we'll have to see how that sort of evolves.
Just to wrap this up, in a nutshell, what could be your unique tea story the inbound audience has been coming to see, and what is it that you think that the Indian travelers find it uniquely exciting or adventurous to be coming to stay with you?
For us, the Indian traveler was very skeptical. Our all-inclusive package was something that people questioned, the pricing. They said, why would we pay so much for a tea estate? And they wouldn't quite understand the fact that, it included, the experience starts at Bagdogra Airport. When you exit that baggage hall, there's a Glenburn driver with a glass of Nimbu Pani, a cold towel, our own cars, our own sort of COVID protocol in place, and then, a 4-hour drive up to the estate, transport whenever you need it to go to Darjeeling town, which is 2 hours away, Kalimpong town, which is 2.5 hours away, plus explore the 1,600 acres within Glenburn. The community aspect of having 55 staff members looking after only, a maximum capacity of 16 guests. I don't think people realized the depth of the operations that we offer on a tea estate to give people that experience. And every single Indian traveler that has come to us has left with their mouths open saying, oh my God, we're going to be back. And they've told people, and then they've come back. So the skepticism that I encountered in September and October, where all I did every day was sit and try and convince people that no, we're not going to give you any discounts, because if you come here, you'll actually understand what we have to offer, to now people say, absolutely, can we stay a month? Can we stay 10 days? It's been wonderful. It's been really special, and people have said that they didn't believe that experiences like that existed within India. So that has been something that we felt very satisfied about. But also, I think even for the international traveler, when they come back to India, a tea estate like Glenburn represents, and I say this with a great deal of trepidation, we haven't had any COVID in Glenburn so far, despite the fact that we have so many villages and communities over there, and it's creeping closer. But it's one of the areas where, with all those horrible stories of migrant labor crossing the country, tea estate workers have remained well-fed, well-housed, safe, and secure for this during this entire tragic past year that we've had. And I think that is a great testament to the tea industry. The kind of human statistics that are behind that cup of tea that everybody drinks every morning is huge. And the more people that visit our tea plantations, be them in the south, in Assam, in Kangra, or in Darjeeling, people realize the depth of what goes into running a tea estate, looking after all those people, because it's not just the tea estate worker, it's their parents, their families, their uncles, their aunts. Our infrastructure, and the reason why many of us are facing financial struggles within the tea side of our businesses is because we are looking after a huge number of people in addition to, and not all of them turn up for work to pick the tea. So, those are the other troubles that one has. So running a hotel, growing maybe avocados one day or something like that is something that is going to be a way of keeping those communities safe, even when some of them run off to do other jobs. But it's a huge human interface with the guests, and I think we've had international guests appreciating that and loving that over the years, and now this past year we've had the domestic guest and the Indian client as well appreciating that, and that to us has been the greatest joy.
Praveerda.
If I can just sum it up, it is a safe, luxurious haven in a rural and remote, mystical part of India, with the options of being exclusive in terms of dining facilities, being in 8 different bungalows in a 22-acre area, being looked after by smiling faces all the time, and eating some great food. A lot of people who came were actually getting away from the everyday. They wanted their own space, they wanted their own freedom. Of course, they wanted their safety, so we had to maintain our protocols very, very carefully. Because it is in the middle of a tea garden, expectation levels were much lower than the actual experience. So the wow factor, even for local people from Assam who have never actually ventured out, because they said, why should we spend our money going somewhere in Assam? We've done the Kaziranga and the Manas once in a life, and that's done. But even they actually came and said, this matches with the experiences of any international holiday, where we went in and learned so much and saw so much and did so much, from cycling to trekking to eating to the local beverages, the local cuisines. And I think it has a lot to do with this whole aspect of safety, security in a rural and remote place where you can experience luxury and get a flavor of the colonial lifestyle. I think that made all the difference.
Surya, Upasana.
For us, I think we've been lucky in the sense that we've always welcomed guests from India right since we started. And over time, this has only grown with every year. We've always welcomed people from all around. They actually, this year, what was interesting is because of COVID, we had a lot of returning guests, people who had stayed with us in the past and they loved their experiences and they wanted to come back, and a lot of word of mouth through them. So we've been very lucky with that. Obviously, food is such an important part of their stay here. So like you mentioned, food is something that we've always been able to cater to depending on the guest preferences or requirements. And that is something that, every stay for us is customized to the guest. And because the family lives in property, this comes quite naturally and quite easily. We've talked about it before. We've never had a hospitality background. So for us, every guest who comes in is essentially our personal guest and they're welcome to our home. So we're actually looking after them how we would any other guest who came to our house. So we have to make sure that they're really enjoying their stay. We've created new memories for them. It's been really encouraging because we've had a lot of guests who actually extended their stays, or they've gone back saying, I wish we had longer, this has been too short, 4 days or 5 days has been too short to stay here. So we've been lucky with all of that, I would say. And Indian markets always welcomed us with open arms, and I'm glad that it's continuing to do so.
Yeah, Venki, great TripAdvisor reviews, and I know it's a very, very personal stay, and I know, and I read through your book, your visitors book. The thing that they all write about is the food and your team, and of course that they feel that they are in a part of India they never knew existed. With hardly anybody around you.
I still get wowed every time I go to one of our plantation locations, which is as often as I can. It's difficult to leave, despite it's also part of my work. And I think one of the unique things is the kindness of the people. It's very, very genuine, touching, and leaving leaving the place every time I visit is still difficult.
Every guest who comes, the first thing they say, they've been to a lot of places everywhere else, but the kind of warmth they feel when they come to these places, they've never experienced it anywhere. And as Upasana said, we have guests predominantly Indians, so we've never had a problem with the Indian market. But as soon as COVID lifted and the guests started coming in, it was all repeats. Because they knew Sinadurai was safe, Sinadurai was naturally socially distanced. They felt safe and secure there. That has been our experience. And as she said again, people come for 2 days, 3 days. They wish they stayed longer.
Thank you everyone for joining in. It was, I always, whenever we speak to somebody in the community, there's so much to learn. And in the plantations, there is the agronomics of the tea, there is the colonial past, there is the social dynamics. Plus, of course, there is adventure, there's activity, there's people, there's stories. The other thing about it is because they are such small places, the interaction between world travelers from all around the world, you can actually sit around, you get to meet interesting people from, the far corners of the world. That makes it very, very interesting. And of course, the tea story is beyond in the kind of experiences that are out in the rare community. The tea story is way beyond the stay. It extends into the community, it extends to the owners, their vision about tea, their style, and of course their all encompassing and their embracing of the local community and what they do with them to create value for them and also for your travels. Thank you very much, and a very, very happy tea day to you. Drink more tea.